Tonight's presentation is a collaborative between the Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society and the A.J. Reed Science Discovery Center from SUNY Oneonta. So we do have Doug Riley, who is here as the director for the SUNY Oneonta A.J. Reed Science Discovery Center, and I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Doug for our introductions.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, just always like to make sure. Okay, so welcome everybody to our webinar tonight. We're really excited to collaborate with Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society in putting this on, and truth be told, they have done almost all of the work. They've been really wonderful. We asked them about this, and then all of a sudden it was all scheduled and done, and that's tremendous. And I'm really grateful. I want to thank all of you involved in helping to put this together. The Science Discovery Center is sadly closed right now, and probably at least through January. So we can't have visitors in our wonderful museum space, but we are trying to serve the public with important and or fun science communication virtually. And so this is one of the things that we're trying to do, is offer more webinars like this. So we're really excited to have this as kind of our first official one. Birding is something that I've been a little bit involved in basically since my daughter was young, and learned all the different bird names and bird calls and things like that. And I think it's a really cool pastime, hobby, passion, especially now during the pandemic. It's a wonderful thing to get people outside, and it's just observing nature, right? In any form has been shown to have really great health benefits, both physically and mentally. So getting out there and watching birds is a really lovely thing to do. And it's something that you can do safely now in the midst of this pandemic. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to offer a webinar on this topic. We wanted to really encourage people in this area to get out, explore some of the natural beauty and the things that live in it. And birds are totally fascinating, right? Because like they are dinosaurs, and like when you look at birds and the bird looks at you, like, you can tell that they know that they used to be dinosaurs. They're really amazing creatures. So so this is not going to be a very long webinar, but we hope that you enjoy it and are inspired to go outside and or put up a feeder or grab a pair of binoculars and go to one of the wonderful bird watching locations that are going to be talked about a little bit later on, and enjoy some of the wonders of our planet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly introduce the other panelists. We say them by name and tell you who they are. So I'm Doug Riley from the Science Discovery Center. I'm joined tonight by Emma Sarnacki, who is our graduate intern. Science Discovery Center, working this summer on helping us create virtual programming like this, or our bi-week science trivia nights, which happen on Fridays. And there was a little advertisement for that in the beginning there. So Emma is here to help us out tonight. And on the other side of things, Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society, we have 3 co-presidents. I don't know if that's all the co-presidents of DOAS, but we have 3 of them. Well, anyway, let me start with our presenters. So our 2 main presenters tonight are Andy Mason, one of those co-presidents, and Charlie Scheim, who's the treasurer of, do you usually say DOAS or DOAS?
DOAS.
DOAS, okay, I thought so. Okay, so Charlie and Andy will be sort of our main presenters. Susan O'Handley is one of the co-presidents and is kind of the wrangler of this entire webinar. We're also joined by who's a longtime DOAS member and is the coordinator of the Otsego area Christmas bird count, and our presenters might tell you a little bit about the Christmas bird count tonight. And then finally, we are also joined by Becky Gretton, who is the other co-president of DOAS. And Becky, Emma, and Sandy are going to be our moderators tonight. They'll be watching the chat for any questions or responding or organizing the questions that get asked when you push the Q&A button, which is the way we're asking you to ask questions tonight. So we hope you enjoy the webinar. We hope you ask questions, and we hope we have a great conversation about birding. So I don't know if I forgot anything. I think I'm good. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy and Charlie, and thank you all so much for being here, and for our participants for popping in and giving our webinar a shot. So, okay.
Hello, everybody. I'm Charlie Scheim. And tonight will be about beginning birding. It's put on by the Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society and the A.J. Reed Science Discovery Center. Here's a picture of me. I've been a birder since I was in college, which was a bit of a long time ago, back in the 1970s. I'm the treasurer of the Audubon now. And I lead a number of bird walks during the year, usually with my wife, Sandy Bright, who is one of our moderators tonight. In my former life, I was a math professor at Hartwood College. I taught there from 1980 until 2018. And I just want to say that the photos and videos that are in this presentation, they're not my work. I picked them up from the internet and used them under the fair use doctrine for the US Copyright Act. And so now let me send it over to the other presenter tonight.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, as you can see there, I'm Andy Mason. I'm one of the 3 co-presidents of DOAS. And I do want to particularly mention Susan O'Handley, who has done pretty much all of this webinar and all of the Zoom work that we've had to do over the last few months. None of us knew how to do it. Susan managed to become an expert in a very short period of time, and they've been quite successful, and we hope to continue. We're going to sort of tag team things here tonight a little bit. I'm going to start off with the beginning basics of birding, and then Charlie's going to take over, and I'm going to come back, and then at the end, hopefully, we're going to have a little brief session from Sandy Bright about actually one of the downsides of birding. We don't want to discourage anyone, but we do want to talk about that a little bit. So this is the basics to get started as a birder. You know, a field guide and a pair of binoculars, and people more typically call it a bird book, but it's a book that gives you information on the birds that are found ideally in your area, or if you're traveling in the area that you're going to. And there's a wide variety. When I started birding, there were only a couple of options for field guides. There was the Peterson guide, which was on that previous slide, which is still available and is still a very good guidebook. Roger Torrey Peterson is kind of credited with popularizing birding in America. And he's passed on now, but his books have been updated, and they are recommended. And then the others, this one, Sibley Birds, David Sibley has sort of taken over, I think, where Roger Peterson left off, and he is now, I think, the best field guides, in my opinion, but there are lots of other opinions too. The field guides come in a variety of geographic types. You'll see some of these are field guide to the birds of North America, obviously the entire continent. Some of the others are just to eastern birds, and then there's corresponding western birds. And there are even books, state level books, field guides. And of course, if you travel overseas, there are field guides there. So I recommend to get an Eastern bird book if you're going to be birding primarily here in this area. Cuts down on the number of species that you have to consider. It's a little bit smaller because fewer birds in there, and you can easily go to another guide when necessary. But like most books these days, they're kind of being overtaken by apps. And there's a wide variety also of bird apps for your phone that have many advantages over books. Number one, they're smaller, lighter. They can provide video. They can provide sound. They really can provide more information than a book would allow because of size limits. So these are a few of them. iBird is a very popular one. Audubon, or the Audubon guide, is the one I use, and for one reason it's free. None of them are terribly expensive. I think they go up to about $10, the apps, but there are a number of free ones, and all very good. And they have other possibilities, such as helping you keep a list of the birds you've seen. They have maps. They have comparisons between similar birds. And all this is very good for beginning birders to help you identify those birds. Now, the third one up here, Merlin, which is a product of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, has a particular focus on helping you identify birds. And they have this sort of pretty simple system of just 5 questions. Where did you see the bird? When did you see it? The approximate size relative to, a robin, a crow, a goose, the main colors, and what the bird was doing out of these options here. And, so pretty basic questions and relatively easy questions to answer. And then once you've done that, you get a list of possibilities. And so you would, you can then narrow it down, look at those birds, perhaps eliminate some that you know, some that you know it is not. And it's not perfect, but from the days when I began birding 40 years ago, it definitely makes things easier for a beginner, I believe. So yeah, you can easily try out those apps and get a feel for them on your phone. This is a typical page from iBird, and this is an Oriole, Baltimore Oriole, and they show you many different views on the apps, as do the field guides. They show you the adults, the immatures, the males, the females, different postures. And this one also shows some similar species that can be confused with the Baltimore Oriole. There are range maps, and on the right there are a variety of the songs. You can hear the songs. Birds do sing, as we know, but they also make a lot of other calls, alarm calls, location calls. So these apps have all of those calls on. They're very, very powerful in that way. Another thing you'll notice with the apps and the field guides is that they're typically paintings. These are all artists that do these guides, and you would think photographs would be better, but in reality they're not. An artist can pose a bird exactly as they want it to appear. It's not always possible to get a photograph just the way you want it, and so there are some field guides that are photographs, but really the ones that are paintings, which is the bulk of them, are superior in my opinion. Another thing about these guides and the books is that the birds are typically arranged by family. And again, you might think it would be better to arrange them by color or size or some other characteristic, but arranging them by family is really a much better way to do it, because it's a lot easier to learn the characteristics of a family of birds than it is to learn all the individuals. If you can narrow it down to a family, you've gone a long way towards identifying the bird. Most of the guides have a section on the characteristics of a family of birds, blackbirds, for example, or warblers. And I recommend reading that section pretty thoroughly and learn the characteristics of the family of birds, so that you can put a bird in a family if ideally. Then we go on to binoculars. That's the second part of the getting started with birding. And binoculars come in a very wide range of prices, from less than $100 up to thousands of dollars. And a lot of birders do spend thousands of dollars on binoculars and spotting scopes, which are another optical tool that people use. But you definitely don't have to go that high these days. Binoculars are pretty good quality. For between $100 and $200, you can get a very good pair of binoculars. Most are waterproof these days, and they're pretty well constructed, and the optics are good. So, if you stick with one of the major brands of binoculars or cameras, you'll probably get a decent pair of binoculars. They come in a couple of styles. The traditional style is poro prism. The eyepieces are offset from the front binoculars, the front lens of the binoculars, the poro prism. And then the other style that has come along in recent years is the roof prism, which are more of a straight line binocular. They come in a number of sizes. When you hear binoculars described as 7x35 or 10x42, what those numbers mean, the first number is the magnification. So 7x35 would magnify something 7 times. So the bird would look 7 times closer to you. And then the second number is the diameter of the big end of the binoculars in millimeters. So the bigger that number gets, the bigger the binoculars get. Now you would think the more powerful and bigger would be better, but that's not really the case. As binoculars get more powerful, as you get up into 15, 20 power binoculars, it's much harder to hold them steady, because not only is the bird magnified, but every little movement of your hand is magnified. So you find that it's hard to keep those binoculars steady. And of course, they do get bigger, they get heavier, and they weigh, they can weigh enough to make your neck uncomfortable if you're wearing them all day. So typical good compromise is 7x35, 8x40, 8x42. A lot of birders use. I've now moved up to 10x42 because my eyes are declining a bit, and so that's sort of the range. There are other differences between the two types. The roof prism binoculars are probably more waterproof because the focusing mechanism is all enclosed in those tubes, whereas the poro prism, the focus moves on the outside of the binoculars. They can both be waterproof, but roof prisms are probably a little bit better. They are a little more expensive too, but probably worth the money. Now, if you already have a pair of binoculars, don't feel you have to go out and buy a new pair. Just to start birding, I would recommend, using them. Using binoculars is something that has to be learned, though. It's not just a natural skill where you pick up binoculars and lift them to a tree and find a bird. It really takes practice, and I always encourage for people to practice on a sign or on something on a building that's not going to move, just to get a feel for raising the binoculars and putting them on what you're looking at. And that does take a fair amount of practice to become adept at. Very often I've led field trips and beginners, and they're just waving their binoculars around in the air trying to find the bird, and that's very frustrating. It can really turn people off. So try out your binoculars, practice without birds before you go out in the field. And the next slide, I think, is what I have described as some binoculars to avoid. The real little binoculars that fit in your shirt pocket they're very convenient, but they really are not very good for birding. they're too small. The field of view, the area that you see when you're using them, is too small to find a bird unless it's very close. And the big end of the binoculars is quite small, and the problem with that is that it doesn't let in much light. So in bright sunlight, you're okay, but if you're in the shadows, if you're in the woods, or if you're out birding early in the morning or in the evening, you'll find you'll have a dimmer image with these small binoculars. They're not letting in enough light for you to get a good view. And then the other binoculars I would say to avoid are zoom binoculars. It sounds like a great idea, binoculars that you can find the bird and then zoom up closer. But the optics on those are not as good as standard binoculars, single strength binoculars. And they are heavier, and the mechanisms tend to not work as smoothly. So again, if you have a pair of zoom binoculars, don't throw them away. Use them and see how you like birding, and then possibly move to another pair. But if you are going to buy a pair, I would not recommend zoom binoculars. Yeah, bird feeding is something that I think a lot of people do. I in preparation for this, I looked up a few statistics on birding, and I found that nearly 50 million Americans describe themselves as bird watchers. And, that's a lot of people. And that definition includes people who have bird feeders, watch them in their backyard. A more narrow definition of people as birders who go out, travel in search of a bird, or who spend time in their yard trying to identify a bird. That's a more narrow definition, and that's about 15 million birders. But in either case, it's a lot of people, and I think probably the vast majority of birders get started with bird feeding. It's a great way to get close to the birds, to see a variety of birds, to learn their behavior. This spring, there were a lot of reports of orioles coming to oranges. Some great photographs going around the internet of orioles. So it's just a good opportunity to see a good variety of birds and to get started in learning them. So if you're not a bird feeder, I recommend it. We probably later, as we get closer to winter, to real bird feeding season, we probably will do a webinar just on bird feeding. So I think that's it for me. I did just want to say that why go birding in the first place, which probably I should have started with. And I really don't have an answer for that. That's something I've been trying to answer for 40 years. A lot of birders kind of get hooked up with one spectacular bird. And for me, it was a prothonotary warbler, which is a beautiful golden bird. And I saw it down in the dank Okefenokee swamp. And I just could not believe there was anything that beautiful. I had no idea, and that's what got me hooked on birding, and it's just been a passion for me ever since. In fact, I have to give a little bit of a warning. Again, it can become an obsession, and spend too much time birding, but you don't have to do that. You can go out and find birds almost anywhere. Anywhere you are, in your backyard, city parks, out in some of the places that we're going to show you later in the presentation. So the birds all around us, and that's one good thing about starting birding. You don't have to worry about finding birds; they're out there for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Charlie, and he's going to go through some of the common birds.
Thank you, Andy. Before we start, though, I'd just like to say that there's been a question about bird feeders right now, and Sandy Bright is going to answer that question.
Okay. Are we ready? No. Oh,
Sandy, I muted you for a second. I think if you can scooch over to Charlie's screen, I think that might work better for the reverb.
Okay. All right.
Okay, try again now.
All right. That's better? Okay, good. The first, there's actually two questions. The first one is, how often do I need to clean my bird feeders? The Cornell Lab of Ornithology recommends you clean them every couple of weeks. And even more often if the weather is really wet, or if you happen to notice some birds that are sick in your yard. How to clean them? You can use soap and boiling water. Some of them you can put right in the dishwasher, or you can use a bleach water solution with 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. That's the method I use. What I generally do is I spray them down good. I make sure there's no gunk in there, spray them and let them dry thoroughly. And then they're ready to go. The second question from the same person about feeders is, we had a variety of birds at our feeders this spring. Now all we get are crows, starlings, and grackles. They clean us out and we rarely see anything else. Even the sparrows stay away. Help. I have to tell you, I feel the same way myself, but it's perfectly natural. It happens every year at this time of year. Many of the birds are off raising babies, and even seed eater birds will feed their babies insects and worms because it's high protein. So what you're seeing are the other birds that are either finished or they come to your feeders no matter what. All of those, we probably shouldn't call quality birds, but that's how I think of them. All the quality birds are off raising their babies, and you will see them again, I promise. Okay, back to Charlie.
I'm getting there, folks. We're all learning how to do this stuff. Here we go. So, I think it's really useful to realize that you don't have to travel far at all to see birds. If you look out your window, you'll probably see birds, and you'll very probably see a robin. This is one of the most common birds that's around, and it's still a very interesting bird. They're a moderate-sized bird. They're about 10 inches from head to tail. They have lots of interesting markings, and that's one of the things that birders do is they notice what they call the field marks of the birds. So like, for example, this robin has a reddish-orange breast. It has a white rump, a dark head, yellow beak, and look at that white eye ring. Some birds have eye rings and some don't. That's a useful way to distinguish between certain birds. Robins are all over the place. They're on your front lawn, they're in city parks, they're in the woods, they're in fields. They're very, very common, but they're interesting to look at, and they're a very good bird to start to think about as your first bird. And so even if you don't have super duper binoculars, you can look at robins out your window on your front lawn and notice the various field marks that they have. They eat bugs and worms and fruit during the summertime. Some even stay all winter and then they just eat fruits and berries. But they have a tough life. They have to be constantly eating and eating food to survive. They make nests of grass in tree or shrub branches. Lots of people actually end up seeing a robin's nest because they build it in a bush that's right outside your picture window, or build it in your window box or something like that. They have little blue eggs. That's where the phrase robin's egg blue comes from. And usually there's 3 or 4 eggs. Those eggs will hatch. The nestlings then are starving. They'll eat 60 to 80 bugs and worms a day. If you have 4 nestlings, we're talking 300 bugs and worms a day that the adults have to find and carry back to the nest. it's a lot of work. It's a lot of food for them to find. Now, one of the things people talk about being a bird watcher, but really looking at the birds is only part of this. The whole other piece of it is listening to them and observing their behaviors. And that's why most people talk about birding rather than bird watching. And what I have here on the left is a video of a robin singing in a tree, and you'll get to hear this robin. Imagine if you went outside tomorrow, pretty much no matter where you live, you would very likely hear robins singing in the trees first thing in the morning. They sing for much of the day, morning, midday, evening. It's a very good bird song to learn first too. And it's easy to do that with one of these smartphone apps. You just go to Robin and you can play the sounds that a robin makes and learn to recognize it. Now, birds make lots of sounds. This is just one other example of the sounds that a robin makes. It's not a singing sound at all. People call it whinnying. So robins make those sounds, they make lots of other sounds. The advantage in knowing sounds is that you don't even have to see the bird to know it's around. And that's usually the first thing, is even realizing there's a certain bird around, and then you might want to look for it. The other thing, of course, that I always think about is, how would a blind person go birding? All they'd know is what they heard. And they can identify birds as accurately as someone who can see simply by listening to them. So here's a second bird. This is another bird that you very likely would see in your backyard. And especially if you have bird feeders. Chickadees come to your bird feeders. They're specifically called black-capped chickadees. There's a whole family of birds, like Andy was mentioning, called chickadees. And the one that's in this area is called the black-capped chickadee. It's a very cute little bird, and it's small. Remember, robins are about 10 inches, chickadees are around 4 inches. They're very bold and adventurous. They're in this area all year round. They stay all winter. They survive through the snow. It feels good to give them food because of that. They're very cute little birds. They're definitely one of my favorites. And here's some of the sounds that they make. This is what people call their spring song. And there he's saying, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. That's where he gets his name from. Chickadees are very adventurous little birds, and they're fairly tame as wild creatures go. If you just put some seeds in your hand and stay very still, maybe rest your hand on a porch railing or a tree branch, and there's no other food around, like no other bird feeders, chickadees will come to your hand. They'll land on your finger, and they'll take seeds right out of your hand. It's a very cool feeling. Now, here's a third bird that's very common around here. Comes to bird feeders very easily. the tufted titmouse. They're often found where chickadees are found. So now here's a field mark. I mentioned before, birders like to pay attention to field marks. Tufted titmice have that pointy little crest on the top of their head. Remember, chickadees just had a round head. So did robins. Their head is round, they have no crest. So that's the thing, a way to distinguish one type of bird from another is to think about, does this bird have a crest? Or does this bird have an eye ring? Notice the titmice they're mostly gray. They have that little black thing over their beak. They have reddish brown on their sides and white underneath. This picture at the right of the chickadee is at a bird bath in winter. And that points out a very good thing. It's important, birds need water. And so in the wintertime especially, it's really useful for you to have a bird bath that can supply them with cold water, liquid water, because it's hard to find that in the wintertime. Now, titmice have a song of their own, and let me play that for you. You'll hear two of them going back and forth. Birders call that counter singing, and they do that to either establish their territories or attract a mate. You can hear the second one answering. Oh, now, I want to show you this little video. It's chickadees and titmice coming to a feeder. And one thing I'll do is talk about how they feed. But the other thing is it will give you some practice at identifying either a chickadee or a titmouse. So we just have two choices. It makes the job a bit easier than when there's 50 birds to identify, but it's a good way to start. Here's our feeder. There's the chickadee. He's been joined by a titmouse. Watch how they eat. The titmouse picked up a seed, holds it between his feet and pecks at it so he can get little pieces to eat. He can't put the whole seed in his mouth. It's the same thing with the chickadee. Lots of times the bird will take a seed and fly away. Now there's a titmouse. Now start thinking, can you identify which bird shows up? What's that bird? It's a chickadee. You should say to yourself what the bird is when you see it next. What's that guy? That's a titmouse. There's another chickadee. And another chickadee. Titmouse. Now, so far we've seen robins, chickadees, and titmice. They're all birds that you can pretty readily see in your backyard. Bluebirds are much prettier. You might know they're the New York state bird. Bluebirds are usually found in fields and meadows. If you have a piece of property that has some fields in it, you might very well see a bluebird. Notice they're not all blue though. The males are blue on the back. In this picture on the right, this left-hand bird is a male, the right-hand bird is a female. Now, that's one of the things with birds. Some species, the males and females, look alike. That was the case for robins titmice, and chickadees, pretty much. But other species, the males and females look different, sometimes quite different. Usually the female is a duller version of the male, and that's generally because the female sits on the nest with the eggs and needs to be more camouflaged, whereas the male should be bright so he can attract the attention of a female. So bluebirds, now notice it's not completely blue, is it? The back and head is blue, but the chest is kind of a brown or orangey tan color. There's this white down underneath in the abdomen and the rump. And here's the sounds of a bluebird. I play golf, and I hear this sound a lot when I'm at golf courses. Now remember, robins build their nests out of grass that's woven together in a tree branch or your window box. Chickadees and titmice do the same thing. Bluebirds have an entirely different nesting kind of behavior. They like to nest in cavities, either holes in trees or nest boxes that people have made. And in this left-hand picture, we have a female who's picked up some grasses for nesting material, and she and the male are shoving it inside the house there, and they'll go in and make their nest that way. You can even see the male here has a little bit of grass in his beak too. On the right is a male feeding a bug to the juveniles that are in the box. Now, it turns out there's not just one blue-colored bird in the area. That would make things easy, but things are not easy. Another blue-colored bird is the tree swallow. So what we want to do now is think about what's the difference between a tree swallow and a bluebird. So the bluebirds, just like this tree swallow here on the left-hand picture, were all blue on the back. Remember though that the bluebirds had an orangey brown upper part of their chest. Notice the tree swallows don't. They're all white from their beak across their chest and down to their rump. So that's a great way to right away tell the difference between either a bluebird or a tree swallow. Another way, as you learn more about birding, you come to realize that bluebirds and tree swallows fly in entirely different ways. And so I can look in the sky, and without even seeing the color, I can say, oh, that's not a bluebird, that must be a tree swallow, just by the way it flies. But you'll learn to do that as you get more experience. Tree swallows are also a breed where the males look much different than the females. The females are just kind of a greenish brown color with the white underneath. Notice they have the same coloring patterns as the male, but it's duller colors. Tree swallows are also cavity nesters, just like bluebirds were. Here's a picture of a male, an adult rather, coming with a bug to feed two nestlings in the hole in the tree. And on the right is a picture of two males sitting atop a bird box that someone has built. We still have more bluebirds around. The blue jay. It's another bluebird that's around in this area. Blue meaning blue colored, of course. Now, notice this one has a crest, doesn't it? Neither the bluebird nor the tree swallow had crests. There's a definite field mark difference between these two. Also, you'll find the blue jays are much bigger. They're about the size of robins or even a little bit bigger. They're very common birds. They'll come to your backyard bird feeder very easily. They're common in meadows, city parks, backyards, forests. They're all over the place. But they're one of the birds that has a crest on their head. They're also around all year round. You'll see blue jays in wintertime as well as in the summertime. And they make lots and lots of sounds. Here's just a few. That's where they get their name from, saying Jay, Jay. There's a completely different sound. You'd never know that was the same bird. Now, another bird with a crest in this area is the northern cardinal. Most people just call it a cardinal. It turns out there are various types of cardinals, but around here is only the northern cardinal. It's really a beautiful bird. It has the males are bright red with that black face mask around an orange beak. The females, once again, are not nearly as bright. The female is on the right here. It does have the same orange beak. It does have a crest. It does have a bit of a black mask around its beak, but it's not at all that bright red. It's more just kind of a yellowish brown color. People love to photograph or paint cardinals. You know, if someone paints a bird, they like to paint a cardinal on a snowy branch in wintertime. It's just a very delightful sort of picture. Cardinals are really loud. This is a great cardinal song to learn. Here's an example of it. They do make a variety of sounds. Here's some other sounds that they make. Mostly I identify cardinals, not so much because I know their song as such, but I can tell just by the quality of their voice that, oh yeah, that sound is coming from a cardinal, because they make a whole variety of different sounds. They also come to your backyard feeder. They're different than titmice and chickadees. Remember, they might get a seed and then they fly away. And when we saw that video of the bird feeder, the chickadees and titmice were flying in and out, getting seeds. Cardinals, on the other hand, will come to your bird feeder and they will just park there. They have big, strong beaks. They can pick up a seed and just eat it right away, rather than little bit by little bit like the chickadee does. Here we can see this cardinal. So notice he just picks up a seed and chews away on it. And he's happy just to sit there and eat and eat and eat. Well, a different bird that is noted for red is the ruby-throated hummingbird. This is just such a tiny little bird. They're, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches in size with that very, very long beak. There's a whole family of different kinds of hummingbirds in the United States, but in our area, and in fact, east of the Mississippi River, there's only one species of hummingbird, and that's this ruby-throated hummingbird. They flit around really, really fast. Their wings beat hundreds of times a minute. They drink nectar from the flowers or sugar water from bird feeders. It's always really a great idea to have a hummingbird feeder in your bird feeding stations if you do that. The birds will come in. What we see here in this right-hand picture is, here's a male. The males have that ruby throat. The females don't, they just have a white throat. The males also, you don't see it in this picture, but they're rather iridescent in the sunlight, and their heads kind of glow that green, and that ruby red, if the sun catches it, absolutely looks like it's on fire. And these birds will either come and they'll land on your feeder if they can and drink out of the ports, or some hummingbird feeders are set up so the bird just flies up, and while it's in flight, it can still drink from the nectar. Another really great bird to see is the Baltimore Oriole. Remember, Andy had a picture of one eating an orange back when he was talking about bird feeders. Orioles are fantastic birds. They're fairly large. They're about the size of a robin, so that means about 10 inches or so. The males are this very bright orangey yellow underneath with black on their upper body, their black head, black body, these white. Now notice the white on the wing. Birders call that a wing bar. You can see it in the female. Orioles have 2 white wing bars. Some birds have wing bars and some don't. And so sometimes when you're trying to identify a bird, you might say, okay, well, does that bird have wing bars? That can help you try to figure it out. In the early spring, they come to bird feeders a lot. They're really hungry after migration. They need sustenance. But once a couple of weeks have passed, they kind of disappear. As our person that asked the question earlier, she said, I had lots of birds in the spring, and now all I have is starlings and grackles. These birds head off into the woods to do their breeding. That's their main purpose in being here, is to breed. They'll probably come back later on to enjoy your feeder again, but not right away. And here's the sound of an oriole. At this time of year, where the trees have so many leaves, it can be tricky to find these birds because they're up in the treetops. And one of the things they're doing up in the treetops is building their nest. Orioles have an entirely different nesting habit from either the robins, which make those round nests of grass, or the bluebirds that nest inside of cavities. Orioles make these hammocks out of grass and other kinds of plant fibers. Like I've seen them stripping pieces off of reeds, little thin pieces, and they bring them back. And it's mostly the female weaves all these pieces together. The male will bring in the pieces and the female then sort of weaves them in. They also weave in artificial stuff too, like strips of cellophane or fishing line or string, all kinds of things. They weave it all together and it hangs down from the tree branches like that. They lay their eggs inside. You can see it's a fairly deep hammock that they've built here. They can house eggs plus an adult bird. And then when the eggs hatch, here comes the nestling, wants food. All bird nestlings look kind of alike. They have gigantic mouths for their heads. And that's because the parents need to key in on that mouth to put the food in it. And it's really seeing that bright color, maybe bright pink or bright red or bright orange inside the baby bird's mouth. When the parent sees that, it automatically knows to put food into it. And that's the way that these babies grow, and they grow really fast. So the birds are born completely helpless. Inside of a month, they've grown enough they can fly away. So they grow extremely fast from tiny little nestlings to full-size adults. And orioles, like I said, will definitely come to your feeders. They seem to like fruit. They like oranges. They like grapes. Sandy puts out grapes cut in half in a Pyrex dish, and the orioles come and take them away, as well as lots of other birds. Robins and cardinals will also come and take away those grapes. Orioles also like to eat grape jelly, and you can put out a little dish of grape jelly, and the orioles will come and eat it. Another common bird in our backyards are the American goldfinch. From bright little yellow birds. They're just a teeny bit bigger than a chickadee, quite a bit smaller than a robin. They come to backyard bird feeders. They like Niger seed. It's a type of thistle seed, tiny little seeds. And they also like what's called black oil sunflower seeds. One of people's favorite birds, really, is the rose-breasted grosbeak. These come to your house in the springtime when they get back from migration. They winter in South America, so they've had a long trip back. Their energy supplies are really depleted. They're starving. They want to eat, and so they come to backyard bird feeders to fill up. When people see this red slash on the throat of the male, they're just blown away. And I usually get lots of people writing on bird lists or saying, wow, I can't believe the grosbeaks are here at my feeder. They look so great. Notice, of course, the female is a much more boring brown color with a kind of neat looking white eye stripe. Here's a rose-breasted grosbeak singing in the distance. A different type of little bird that we have in this area is the phoebe. There's a whole group of birds that are called flycatchers. And they get that name because of what they do. They stand somewhere, say on a branch or on top of a fence post like this phoebe is on the right, and they search around for bugs that are flying, and they fly out and grab them. Here's an example. We can watch this video. The phoebe bobs its tail a lot. See that tail bobbing? It's looking around for a bug. Sees one, comes back. It's got a huge bug. It's a wonderful meal. You should try it, folks. Phoebes say their name when they sing. Phoebes build their nests. They make these piles of mud and grass, lots of times underneath your deck or under the eaves of your roof. They make their nest, and here's a picture of a phoebe feeding its nestlings. Looks like a gigantic grasshopper. If you do travel further than your backyard, you might see some other birds, and we just want to talk about a few now. If you go off to some place where there's some meadows, say Upper East Street, just for example, or up at the Audubon Sanctuary, one of the first birds you might encounter is the Yellow Warbler. The male Yellow Warbler has these orangey stripes on his breast. The female doesn't. But otherwise, both of them are these bright yellow birds with little black eyes. They stay in low bushes and sing a lot like this. This mnemonic, sweet, sweet, little more sweet. That's what people think as the bird is singing, and it helps me, for example, to remember their song. Another bird that's very common in the meadows is the chestnut-sided warbler. So remember, the previous one was a yellow warbler. There's a whole family of birds called warblers. And they're usually fairly small little birds, like 4 or 5 inches in size, oftentimes very brightly colored. This chestnut-sided warbler, there's the chestnut on his side. That's where the name comes from. A bright yellow cap, and some wing bars, a black mask, and they say, please, please, pleased to meet you. The third bird that I just want to point out that you might see in the fields, another favorite bird of people, it's another bluebird, but notice this one is pretty much entirely blue. This is called the indigo bunting. It's a deep, dark indigo blue, completely. Sometimes, depending on the lighting, they might even look like they're black because the blue is so dark. The females are not that beautiful blue color. They're really just sort of a dull, brownish, light tan sort of a color. And buntings, this is a good bird. If you know its song, it can help you find it, because what they do is they perch themselves at the very tops of trees and start singing. And the thing that identifies buntings to me is their song happens in pairs. So as you listen to this, listen to the pairs of sounds. Whoops. Let's try that again. Very rapid pairs. Now I just want to say, just for an entirely different sort of bird, waterfowl. We have lots of waterfowl in the area. Here are three really common ones. Canada goose, you see these birds everywhere. They're big birds. They're like about 2 feet tall. They have that black neck and the white chin strap. The males and females look pretty much alike. And here's a little gosling. They reproduce prolifically in this area. And in, say, early May, mid-May, you see goslings all over the place. At this point, they're grown and they look like small versions of the adults. We also have mallards. You'll find those in lots of ponds in the area, and mergansers. The Canada goose is here year-round, as long as there's open water. If the lakes freeze over, of course, then they leave and head to places where there might be open water. But if it's a mild winter, they may stay here all year around. They're the bird that flies overhead in the fall and the spring in a V formation. And you hear them all honking as it flies. Let me show you. They take that V formation because it's easier for the following birds to follow someone, because the lead bird breaks all the wind resistance, the air resistance. Just like cyclists, they say they get in the draft, they draft behind another cyclist. It makes it easier for them to cycle. It's the same thing with the geese. And apparently different birds will take the lead at different times. Mallards, now they're a species where the male and female are different. Here's the male with a bright green head, brown front, white underneath, orange feet. The females have the orange feet, but otherwise they're just a mottled brown. Both males and females, though, have this bright blue bar. It's called a speculum, and it has a white border along it. Mallards eat pretty much anything they can find. Plants, roots, bugs, snails, slugs, worms, and they're known as dabbling ducks. There's two kinds of ducks, dabbling ducks and diving ducks. Dabbling ducks stay on the surface, and we'll see this male, we'll see this male feeding from the surface. He's probably in a shallow pond, and you see he came up with some plant matter. He can reach the bottom and pull up that plant matter. The third bird I want to mention in the waterfowl is the common merganser, because you see this one a lot in this area. It's a white bird with a black head and a black back. Very striking the way there's that cut between the neck, the head and the neck there, and a reddish color beak. The females don't look anything like that. They're the more boring gray-brown color, and they have this, lots of mergansers. The females have this kind of wild crest in the back. It looks like they're having a bad hair day. It's very noticeable. And mergansers eat fish. And so they dive to get their food. And here's an example of a merganser hunting. You'll notice he dips his head under the water, looking for prey. And then he'll dive. There's a slow motion of that dive. So that's a thing that a birder might pay attention to. Is the duck that I see out there, is it a dabbling duck or is it a diving duck? Because that will rule out or rule in a number of species. That's the end of our bird section of this presentation. We thank you and we welcome any questions that you might have. We had any? No. No, okay. One other thing that we wanted to talk about tonight, Andy mentioned, was the downside of birding, ticks. It's gotten worse and worse in this area, but you really always have to be thinking about ticks when you go out into a field. Even in your backyard, you can get ticks, and you need to protect yourself. Ticks are found in tall grass and brush. They're found in logs and wood piles. They're found in the wooded areas, the forests, underneath various ground covers, under leaves. They're everywhere, and they get on you very easily. So when you're bird watching, of course, you're going to see all that stuff. So you should try to wear light color clothing, wear long legged pants so that you can tuck your pant leg into socks. You might spray insect repellent on, either something with DEET or oil of lemon eucalyptus is a natural insect repellent. You can buy treated gaiters that wrap around your clothing, your pant leg rather, or you can even buy bottles of this permethrin, it's called, and you can treat your clothing with permethrin. Once you're out, when you come back, you should check yourself. All kinds of places where ticks like to go. It's good to take a shower. Make sure you wash them away. But water doesn't kill ticks. So what you should do is you take your clothes, put them in the dryer on a high setting for about 10 minutes. That will kill the ticks. They could live through a washing machine cycle, but they can't live through a dryer. All of this information can be found at the Center for Disease Control website, and you should definitely check it out if you want a bird. Thank you very much, folks. Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society and the A.J. Reed Science Discovery Center is really glad that you came tonight. Here's contact information for the Audubon and for the Discovery Center. We urge you to contact us if you want questions or need some help with something.
Charlie, we did have one question, which is, what is the most common wren in this area?
The most common wren by far is called a house wren. House wrens are really, they sing a very bubbly song. They're cute little birds. They're fairly small, 3 or 4 inches. They have a relatively long tail that sticks up behind them and a fairly long, sharp beak that they peck at other birds with. They're great little birds. If you put a birdhouse in your backyard with a fairly small hole, say about 1 inch or so size, house wrens might come and live in that house and raise their babies.
Thank you.
There's the sound of a house wren. Very bubbly sound. Any other questions, folks?
But this is our homepage. You'll find some important announcements on here. You'll also find just below the fold our upcoming activities. Tonight was our Birding for Beginners presentation. We are going to follow this up with some informal chat sessions starting on a 2-week schedule. So 2 weeks from tonight, 7 to 7:30. So we'll make them short. And we're going to rotate through different panelists from our board of directors, that if you have a birding question and you just want to pop in and share some information or ask about a bird that you've been seeing and you're curious about, you can do that at that point. And I'll have information on those posted tomorrow. There's also coming up our bird photography chat, which our part 2 session is taking place next week. So you just have to click through and read more on these pieces. You'll find a lot of information on our website, but I do want to bring your attention to links and resources. One of those is a bird checklist for our region, which was just updated in 2020. And we've basically made it so that it's current, and you'll find pretty much the birds that you're able to see here throughout the year. And it'll indicate if they're winter species or spring species, if they're rare or if they're common. That's a downloadable PDF. It is 2 pages. You can print it double-sided. The other thing I wanted to point out was our favorite birding spots. And that is basically, when you click that, it's going to bring you to this beautiful custom Google map. So it is accessible with your smartphone, and basically it will identify different areas, different places where you can go birding. And if you find someplace you want to check out, you can click on the description on the left. It will highlight the map marker into the center of your page so you can see exactly where it is. And it will give you a nice description of what you'll find there and kind of what the trails are like, etc. So, if you want to find someplace close to where you live, you can always use this map and look for some of our favorites. If you discover a new favorite and you'd like to report it, you can go ahead and send us a little write-up and the location so that we can continue to build this resource out over time. So we'd love to have your participation with that. I do want to mention, just as a very last piece, that this webinar recording and a few support documents will be posted on our website tomorrow. I'll get the recording this evening, and then those will be located in the education section all the way at the bottom under webinars. And that will basically bring you to all of our webinars that we've held to date since March when we started doing this. We're still kind of new at it and learning. But you'll be able to find information here, and if there's additional resources that go along, it'll be on the detail page. So you can go ahead and click read more. It'll come to the page about beginning birding webinar, and it'll have the links to those resources that you can download. So I think what I'm going to do is turn it over to Doug just for our closing comments. On behalf of Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society, I thank everybody for coming tonight. Hope you enjoyed it, and we appreciate your attendance. Go ahead, Doug.
Great. I hadn't prepared any closing comments, but just want to thank Delaware-Otsego Audubon Society for doing this with us and putting on this wonderful webinar. It was really, really awesome. Thank you, Andy and Charlie. That was just lovely. And I'm excited to visit some of those locations to check out the birds and the nature, and quite a few of those I don't know about. I'm a hiker, but I'm still discovering this region too. So I'm sure there's a lot to see at those places. So please visit their website and check out some of their other activities and resources, because they have a really, really well-developed website. And please follow the A.J. Reed Science Discovery Center on Facebook or on our website, which is an offshoot of the SUNY Oneonta webpage. And we are going to be presenting more webinars throughout the fall on different topics. So we'll be joining you again. So thanks everybody again. And thank you, Susan and Sandy and Emma and Becky for helping put this on as well. This was great.
Thank you too. All right. Good night, everybody.